Hi, this is Joseph from NajoniPhoto.com, and today we are going to be running through a pretty simple image edit. So the first thing I want to talk about with this image is an application that I've been recently using that's been very helpful. It's called the Photographer's Ephemeris, and what it is it's an application that uses Google Maps, and it will actually show you where the sun is going to rise and set in the sky. So you can just set a point on the map and it'll tell you the exact location where the sun will set, and it'll give you the exact time that the sun will set or the sun will rise. It'll also show you the moonrise. And what's really cool is, let's say you're in a valley surrounded by mountains. This application will actually tell you when the sun is scheduled to rise over those mountains. So it's a really cool application. Well, what I've been recently using it for is, in addition to that app, called Skyfire. And what Skyfire is it predicts whether or not there's supposed to be a good sunset that night. And it uses things such as cloud formation, percentage of clouds in the sky, I guess how high the clouds are in the sky, because that all plays into whether or not the light can catch the color in those clouds well enough to produce a beautiful sunset. Now, I've heard that people who live on the coast, on the ocean, that the application Skyfire isn't really that accurate because the weather is very unpredictable on the ocean, and it's very hard to tell what the conditions are going to be like. But inland, where I live in Arizona, it's pretty darn accurate. Every time I've seen a beautiful sunset, I've pulled out this application, and sure enough, it tells me that there was a great sunset predicted that night. Additionally, for this photo, I specifically went to this location because Skyfire alerted me in the morning that there was supposed to be a great sunset here. And that's another thing that's cool about this Skyfire app, is that you can set a favorite location on it, and you can tell it, you can set it so that it will alert you days in advance if there's supposed to be a beautiful sunset. So I have it set to tell me if there is a more than a 90% chance that there will be a good sunset in Tucson. Because Tucson's a 2-hour drive from where I am right now. So if I'm going to go, I would like to be pretty sure that there's going to be a good sunset. So I really like this application because what it allows you to do is you don't have to worry as much about what the conditions are going to be like. You can just use this application to predict a good sunset, and then you can just go out into the field and spend time scouting for those really killer compositions and have plenty of time to set up, having a really good idea that you know there's probably going to be a good sunset that night. So it's called Skyfire. I highly recommend you use it. The Photographer's Ephemeris app is free, but Skyfire is somewhere around $15 for 3 months of use and $35 for a year's worth of use. So I'd highly recommend it. Okay, so this photo, as I said, I had a good idea that there was going to be a good sunset in this area, but unfortunately I didn't really get there until it was barely 20 minutes before the sunset. So I didn't have a lot of time to find a really great composition. But I did see these cacti off in the distance. This was right off of the highway, on Highway 17 north of Phoenix. And I did the best I could with this composition. I got the longest lens I had in my bag, and I just caught this beautiful Skyfire sunset with these saguaro cactuses just kind of being silhouetted by this beautiful light here. So let's start with this image edit. The first thing I'm going to do is crop in on this image. Now, typically I don't do this. I like to get my compositions right in camera. I like to fill the frame. But again, I didn't have a lot of time to find a great composition, and I was really far away from these cactuses, so I did the best I could. So with that in mind, we're going to crop in a little bit to about here. We're going to pull this in a little more. And using the rule of thirds, that's how we're going to try to compose this image. Okay, I kind of like this cacti off in the third part of this frame. Okay, so we're going to hit enter to get that going. Okay. We don't really need to mess around with the temperature nor the tint. I think it looks pretty good. The camera nailed the white balance. Exposure, we're not really going to mess around with that at all, but we will add a little bit of contrast. We're going to bump it up. 40 is a little high. We'll take it down to 30. Okay. Now, since we added contrast in, it darkened our image a little bit, so I'm just going to compensate for that by just bumping the exposure up a little bit. Okay. We're going to skip the highlights for now, go down to shadows. We're going to pump those shadows way up. Because I really like what the shadows are doing here. When we pump them up, I feel like we get this better effect here with the sky, the sun, just kind of beaming behind this bush, and I think it looks really cool. But 100 is a little too strong for my taste, so we're going to back it off just a little bit, maybe to about 70. And when we played around with the shadows, we brightened the highlights just a little bit too much. So we're going to compensate for that by dragging our highlights down. 40 is way too high. Even 20 is too high. But 10 looks pretty good to me. Okay? Now the white and the black point. Typically what we do with this is we hold down the Option key and we will play around with our slider, and what we're trying to do is we're going to pull the whites to the point where we're not seeing that color clipping there. Okay, now in this image we already are at the clipping right from the start, so we're going to do a different technique. What we're going to do instead is we're going to tap the J key, and that's going to show us our clipped highlights right in the photo, and we're going to play around with the whites just from here. Okay, let's pull them down a little bit, pull them up. I'm going to pull the whites down until I'm really not getting a lot of that color clipping. Okay, pull them down to about -20. And I'm going to pull the blacks down just a little bit. Okay. Now as you can see here, we are kind of clipping our blacks a little bit. Well, that's because we have these really deep dark blacks down here. Now I really don't care about that because there's no detail at all in this area. It's just kind of some dead space here, so we're not going to worry about that. Okay, we're going to move on to the clarity. Add a little bit, maybe +20. That looks good. Now we will go down to the vibrance. What vibrance does is it saturates the colors that aren't already well saturated in the photo. Okay, so we're going to bump this vibrance up a little bit, maybe to about 20, and bump the saturation up, but not that far, maybe to about 10. And that's looking pretty good right now. We're going to hit the / key to see a before and an after. A nice subtle difference there. Okay, our next slider we're going to play around with is the HSL. Now this stands for Hue, Saturation, Luminance, and we will go into this a little more in the upcoming Lightroom class, but essentially we can isolate a specific color and play around with the saturation and the brightness of that color. It's a really, really powerful slider, and you should use it all the time. Okay, now one thing we can do with this is we can individually go down through each color and play around with it, or you can click this little toggle here and you can run this over your image and it'll show you what color you're playing around with. So you see, look to the right, we're hovering over blue right now, obviously. Down here we're in the orange territory, and here we're down in the yellows. So blue, orange, and yellow, those are the three colors we're working with. First thing we're going to do is play around with the oranges. Now what I like to do when I mess around with the HSL slider, for me personally, I like to completely pull the saturation out of the color and then pull the saturation all the way up just to get an understanding of what areas I'm exactly working with in this photo. And then once I pull them all the way up, I bring the saturation down to a level that looks real or doesn't really add any pixelation in the color. So I'm going to show you that now. We'll start with the orange all the way down. See how it just pretty much takes it out of the image. This is just completely dead at this point. Let's bring it all the way up. And that's really saturated. Way too saturated for my taste. So again, we're going to pull it up, pull it down, probably to about 60. Okay, let's do the same with the yellows. The yellows are a little more subtle. I really like the way the yellows look at 100%. However, I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to go all the way up to 100. I'm going to pull them back just a little bit to maybe about 80, even 70. Okay? And now that I'm looking at it, maybe the oranges are just a tad too bright. I'm going to pull the oranges back just a little bit. Okay? Lastly, the blues. Now, to my taste, the blue is really nice, but in my opinion, it kind of distracts from the real magic that's happening in the photo, and that's down here at this horizon line. I really want to draw the viewer into the sunset and into the colors down here, so I kind of find these blues a little bit distracting. So I'm going to do something a little odd. I'm actually going to desaturate my blues just a little bit. Plus, -20 is a little strong. So maybe we'll go up to -15. So again, I'm just trying to pull a little bit of the saturation out of that sky so that your eye naturally goes down to the more colorful area down in this horizon. So let's hit this toggle switch to see a before and an after. And as you can see, the HSL slider is really powerful. It makes a big difference in our photos, but if you do it right, it's powerful and yet it's subtle at the same time. So that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it was informative, and please stay tuned for more videos from my channel, including my full class on learning Lightroom. Thanks and have a great day.